Welcome everybody to our first Saturday workshop with our visiting artist, Victor Juhasz. Victor is an artist and illustrator, courtroom artist, and combat artist for the United States Marine Corps Combat Art Program. So, without further ado, I introduce you to Victor Juhasz.
Thank you. And let me just say that it's a pleasure to be here, starting off this whole program, explaining drawing and techniques, and I guess demonstrating tricks, or at least either physically or what we can talk about in terms of how to deal with drawing under compressed circumstances. I think every time I have approached one of these assignments where I used to do work with the Air Force when their combat art program was very active. My basic premise with them was that I didn't want to really draw planes, and there were so many other great artists who could render an airplane or a helicopter or a missile or whatever. And I said I wanted to basically spend my time with the boots on the ground. I wanted to record that. Why? Because one of my dearest friends and mentors was Howard Brody, who was CBS's, probably CBS's premier. There were several really terrific artists at the time, but he was probably their premier court artist. And I grew up looking at Howard's work on television with Uncle Walter and later on with Dan Rather and stuff like that. And that was part of the thing that really inspired me to, that was one of the inspirations for me wanting to be an illustrator, was I said, I'd like to do that. I just loved the energy that was in his courtroom work. And then I found out later, because once I started going to Parsons, and I grabbed this book called World War II by James Jones, which is basically a book of combat art with James Jones, the great writer, filling out an awful lot of copy in the book itself. And it was in that book that I realized that Howard was also a serious combat artist. He was World War II, he was Korea, he was Vietnam, and carried through, I don't think he ever went to Iraq or Afghanistan in our experiences over there, but he still continued to draw military training exercises for the Army, for the most part, which was where he had a very serious stroke out in the Mojave one night. He was 83 years old, so you're thinking 83 and still in full battle gear and walking around with, in that heat, and then woke up in the middle of the night and realized half of him was not moving. And so that kind of put an end to his career, and he tried to relearn how to draw, but his stroke was pretty severe. His son Bruce took care of him for the last 10 years of his life there at the ranch, and but Howard was still giving interviews, he was still lecturing, and he was still always in contact, and was always such a positive force. I met him during the John Hinckley trial. When I was working for the Washington Post, I got called down to draw that trial, and I've written about it, and I don't want to go through that story again, but just let's say we met there. It was a wonderful experience. From the moment we spoke to each other, we kind of like became best buds, and we hung together for as long as I was there during the trial. I would be sent back and forth by the post, come down and then go back home and stuff like that. But whenever I was down there, he was there, and we always had long philosophical conversations. He never taught me. He was always just like this very positive guru, in a sense, just all this incredible energy. Why am I saying this? Here's why. Because one of the things that truly impressed me about Howard, and I noticed it the first day I was there at the Hinckley trial, was watching him, how he went for the most important lines first. And this is something I think all of us in the combat art program have to deal with when we're on location. Let's assume there are two different types of situations. One is an actual combat zone. I've not been in really crazy situations except once in Afghanistan with the dust-off unit, an Army dust-off unit. And that was kind of hairy, but I can assure you that was nothing compared to what they oftentimes encountered in picking up wounded soldiers. But so you have that. You have a combat situation, which sets up a whole bunch of rules in terms of what do you have to deal with, in terms of how do you capture what's going on, realizing that it's very kinetic, it's very fluid, and it's very chaotic. Then there's the other situations where we go out, we do go on locations, we draw training exercises, and that sets up a different group of rules or improvisations on how to deal with what's going on in the exercises. Let's start with the exercises because they're easier. And I think one of the things we do in the combat art program, and because we kind of immerse ourselves, we hope to, we usually try to spend about a week, at least a week, with the units as they're training, and that allows you a couple things. Most important is you start seeing where's the situation static, and where are things moving. And also, you have the advantage that these are exercises, so they're repeated over and over. And then there's the debrief, there's evaluation of what went on, and then they'll repeat it. They'll repeat it with another unit, they'll repeat it with the same unit maybe. But in the course of that time, the first time is usually mostly chaotic because you're trying to figure out where you should be. Second time around, you have the advantage of, if I'm over by this building, they'll be coming through. They all have to come through down this street because this is where the action starts. This is where they are being observed by the coyotes and their instructors as to what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. So you, by that second time, you kind of know where to plant yourself. You've also got those basic sketches the first time around. You can go back and start filling in the spaces. Doing this, somebody coming through a town doing this, there's a lot of Marines coming through. You can start putting body parts together. You do not have to be exact. You can start taking notes for yourself. Let's go to a Brody. This is from World War II, Guadalcanal, and those are his quick notes to himself. Becomes a more finished drawing later, and I think there's even a further, I could not find it before, but there's a further finished thing that wound up running in Yank. You also have to deal, now this is not a training exercise, this is actual combat. So what are you doing? You're taking notes to yourself, whether you're in a combat situation or whether you're just in a non-violent circumstance like a training exercise. You start making mental notes to yourself. You put it down in your sketchbook. You put it down, you just make notes. And the fact is that things will be repeated over and over again. And you'll start filling in the spaces on those pages that you started. You'll also realize that things happen where they'll abruptly leave and they're not going to repeat it. So then that's where the camera comes in. Your best friend is your camera under those circumstances. And it took me a while, especially with the Air Force, when I was first starting out doing this with the Air Force, to realize that stop drawing at certain points. You got a camera right here. You're going to miss an awful lot of information. Take it. It's your reference material. It's what you'll fall back on. Especially with the uniforms nowadays, when the Marines are totally jacked up with their gear, that's a lot of stuff to draw. And when you look at a drawing like this from World War II, that was the uniform essentially. Okay, there was no heavy flak jackets, so that was it. And the fact that he could draw, like he had a steel trap memory on body. He knew the muscles and everything inside out. I was going to try to print off some of his exercises where he just is drawing a figure, a naked figure, and figuring out the muscles and the bones as he's turning the body. Why? It's probably tedious as hell in one sense, but at the same time, that's how he got to know. That's how he could like take just quick notes to himself and then fill in the details later. So we're talking about you really have to have a very strong background, a foundation in drawing. I don't have that kind of academic foundation. Also, he was old school. That was beginning of the early 1900s and stuff like that. He was born in like 1919, so when he was going to school, that was the academic way. You taught. You knew it inside and out. And I'm always perplexed when I'm with other artists who can tell you, oh, that's the dorsal whatever, blah blah blah. This is this, and I'm going, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm just going to draw it. I kind of feel I know where it is. Comic artists, I notice, are like those who do the comic books, the superhero books. They are also like they're almost like medical artists. They know all the muscles that are going on, and the muscles that are on top of muscles. So you have what you're looking to do as a combat artist, and this takes a long time. I'm 68. I still feel like every time I'm approaching a drawing, I'm approaching it for the first time. There's always something to learn, and there's always something that I realize I've done not that great the last time around. There's something I missed, and so the development of your drawing skills is never ending. And I can attest to how that develops, how you can observe it just in other people. We have Elise McKelvey, who was a staff sergeant by the time she left the Corps, and when we first started mentoring her, myself, Mike Fay, Chris, she was raw. Her drawing skills were raw. She had the passion, she had the interest, and she had the desire to learn, and it was a process, and you just encouraged it. And I was like, this is not a good example, but it's like platoon. You had the cruel sergeant, you had the more new age sergeant, William Defoe versus Behringer. I was always the one pushing for the gesture. Get away from outlining. Don't draw because that by the time you get down, by the time you start, if you're trying to outline it, by the time you get down to the shoulder, that person's run away. Get the most information from the quickest gestures. How is that body bending? All right. What is the most important line that you have to remember when you've got a figure like that? Where's the thrust? Where's the most pressure on, the most weight? Thank you. And also, don't draw what you think you see. Okay, that's the worst mistake we make, and I continue to make it. But I'm doing better in terms of catching myself. You think you see in the most mundane example, you think you see a sleeve, and you just gesture to yourself because that's the way I automatically will do it. But then you look at it, and it's not. And it actually impacts even the way a jacket or a sleeve bends or the folds. If you're just notching stuff that's kind of automatic, it's not right. It's not going to be right. we're not talking about being right in an academic sense, but we're talking about right in terms of what helps the gesture. I often find, like, this is a great example. This is Vietnam, Brody. That's got to be a quick drawing right there in the rice paddies, and that's no fooling around. So it's so easy when you're out there to just, oh, I'm going to go for the dramatic gesture. But if you're making it too dramatic, you've actually thrown the weight off of the entire gesture, and it's going to look wrong by the time you start getting toward the end of your drawing. It's almost like you've cartooned it, and it's not going to work. You're not getting the information down right. So you have to discipline yourself. I have to discipline myself to pull back a little, think about what you're drawing, make sure you got the gesture, but make sure you're not making it. You're not doing it in such a way that you are going to ruin the forward momentum. You're not the narrative of the body language. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And we're all guilty of it. We even when, like if you draw a house and then you draw the roof, and then if you really look at it, oh no, that roof was not, that's the way I'm thinking. That's my mind telling me a roof goes like that. But if you're actually looking at it in relation to the one side that's over here and the other side that's over there, they're that high, but you've just drawn it that way because, that's the way I automatically draw. And I think automatic, that kind of reflexive, I don't really want to call it lazy. It's just something that you do. You want to get down. You want to get something down, and this is the way I've always done it. When we draw portraits, I often watch, if I'm in a drawing class, the Society of Illustrators still has their great drawing sessions, and once upon a time I used to run those drawing sessions. Now it's being other people manage that.
You have to study anatomy, and you do have to know the basics of everything, but not to the point where you then become lazy and you just say, oh, rooftop or shoulder looks like that. You do have to know, because sometimes that knowledge of anatomy will say, wait a second, that actual bone will be here and that muscle, it's tricking me, so you can, but you do have to draw what you see that's informed by what you know, but don't let your knowledge get in the way of, and that means, the one thing I just wanted to say was, maintain freshness of your knowledge of anatomy and maintain freshness of your knowledge of or observation. So both.
You can tell Chris spends a lot more time talking to people than I do. I sit in the studio an awful lot, and you tend to have a lot of thoughts, a lot of brilliant thoughts going on in your head when you're sitting in the studio, and then you finally get a chance to speak to people, and if that's not your forte, it becomes a different story. As combat artists, and I use that term again loosely because we're not always. I've rarely been in actual hardcore combat situations, but I have done an awful lot of drawing in exercises, which are kind of like faux real. They still are all geared up, and there's still circumstances that they're creating for their soldiers or Marines to deal with.
It's good training on both counts.
Well, actually, before I got into the program, when Mike Fay wanted me to get into the Marine Combat Artist program, I said, wouldn't it be a good idea if we as artists, those of us civilians, kind of hung, really embedded and kind of learned protocol on what to do once things really got bad. We do not want to be a detriment to the situation and kind of take away, become an obstacle actually, rather than some sort of assistance. And if you don't know what to do, if you're really not, that's another thing too. We really, I don't know. I don't think it's emphasized enough, maybe, but I think it would help if more of us as civilians, especially the civilian ones, got more of that in-depth protocol training in situations. We're behaving a lot better now. we kind of get the deal at this point. But I think fresh, obviously the Marines who want to draw, who want to be part of the combat, they already know the program. They know protocol. They know what to do under certain circumstances, under all circumstances, basically. Let's go to something here. Again, notes. You make notes to yourself. Howard makes a note. This is probably this is definitely the Pacific campaign, and maybe Guadalcanal, maybe later on. Maybe it was they were going the island hopping. But here's his notes to himself. That looks like a scribble, right? It's not. You basically, if you know how to draw, you basically know that gesture can fill out to that kind of body. Why does that fill out to that body? That structure, because you know anatomy, and you can therefore recreate that. This scribble, he's basically telling himself or remembering to himself how the body was sitting, that gesture, where the arm was, and then he can fill it in. That looks kind of confusing if you don't know what you're doing, but if that's your note, you know that how to pop that figure leaning forward. That's anatomy. And again, the advantage of having uniforms that were so simple, relatively speaking. Even the uniforms during Vietnam are like so simple compared to contemporary armor, body armor that we have to confront, which is another topic. So if you're drawing all these exercises, let's go back to the exercises. If you're drawing the exercises and you know they're going to be coming, the soldiers or Marines are going to be coming through this particular part and they're going to be repeating this exercise, what's the most important thing you need to be factoring in? You want to factor in the body language first. And then and with your camera, you're taking your reference shots, and then you can start filling out the gear. Maybe by the second or third exercise, you can at least start filling out the gear. But what you want to do is get that body language down. You want to get that. We're all involved in visual narrative. You want to get that story flowing. You want to get that from left to right, that story happening, or from right to left, or from up to down. But you want that story being told, and that requires you to really pay attention to the figures, how they're relating to each other. Then you start to talk. That's another issue. You've got a number of Marines walking together. So you got one down, maybe two, maybe three. You got three quick gestures. You got your camera working so that you can fill in the details. Second time around, you can start filling in more if that's necessary to the story, if that's what you want to do. There's that panorama I did with that had you in it,
right,
where I was just kind of like had been doing sketches from this one vantage point because we realized this is where the action is going to start. So I kind of sat myself there, and between taking pictures like a panorama and jotting down notes of who was where and who was doing what, I could start piecing together a long, I don't know, it was like 6 foot long, piecing together of pages out of my moleskin pad, my big one, the large one, the 12 by 17. And then I could just paste them down, dry mount them down, and fuse them together, and then I could add the watercolor in, but I had the drawing. And then I could keep, everything was mounted down, I could also start filling in the details of what was going on in the background because I had the camera reference. So we're not geniuses in the sense that I can't think of too many people who can just have a complete piece of art right there on the spot. We do an awful lot of work from the standpoint of making notes to ourselves that we can eventually fill in once we get back to the studio. And then, I'm gonna contradict myself, then there's times you have that drawing that just about says everything, and then you don't wanna touch it, because if you add stuff, it's gonna start actually destroying A, the visual narrative, B, the energy. Once you start getting into details, you're gonna start tamping down the energy of your intuitive lines, your subconscious notations, you know? Your that raw gesture that you're putting down. And that becomes a matter of choice for the artist. How detailed do you want to get? How tight do you want to get when you're finishing that piece? Or how loose do you want to keep it? I find that a lot of times when I say, in my circumstances, if it's working, I really don't want to mess around with it anymore. Leave it be. That's for the record. If I want to turn it into a painting, want to get more detail, that's another story. Then I can, I can do the squares and blow it up and just basically jot down on a canvas where things are going to be. Notes to myself.
I remember on the USS Bataan when we were in what's the office called where they run all the deck.
Oh,
And
right.
we were in there both sketching. You had a great sketch. All the information from that little command, whatever it's called. Anyway, flight control.
It was the flight command.
Flight deck control.
Flight deck
I think
control.
it was
Yes,
what's
okay,
called
right.
on USS Bataan. But you did a wonderful sketch that was all there. But then what you did was you took that and did a painting that was, so that the drawing stayed fresh. You said, okay, I'm not going to mess with it, because you do lose some of that freshness if you do it too much later. But then you did a painting related to that same office.
Yeah, and what happened, because it was so cramped and people were running around, there was kind of a chaotic situation in there all the time, and you were always getting jostled around. You took pictures because you had to take pictures. So you had to, and we kind of planted ourselves in a spot where you didn't get jostled around too much, but you still were in the way at times, because it was, that room itself probably was 2/3 the size of this, that flight command room. And when you have about 8 to 10 people running through all the time, as the jets are taking off, that's a lot of moving around. So even if you found what you thought was a safe spot, it's not a safe spot. That's a digression.
Yeah, the lesson being, get in a place where you know you're going to see the action and be out of the way as best you can. Try to do both. Sorry.
Of all the people here, who's actually done some drawing on the spot with the core or with Todd never?
A lot of assembly art and at the yard in DC, a little bit of stuff, but
Well, that's reportage. That fits.
Yeah. But anybody else? So, are you? Is everybody looking to be more involved in actually getting sent on location to do
We've
work?
got a provisional company, provisional.
Oh, okay. Super.
Just starting.
Captain Noah.
Okay.
I travel around probably 2 or 3 months.
As long as you're not violating any type of security, I mean, that's for the public. That's the historical record, if not necessarily the public record. Can I let me go back to something I said before about Elise McKelvey. So when we were first mentoring her, she was a recruit. She was down in Paris Island, and she wanted to be an artist, but she was also wanted to be a Marine, and she was going through the whole boot camp situation, and that's where we first were introduced to her. And like I said, she was raw. And since, 2013?
Yeah.
2013, 2014? Something around there. To watch that progression with that kind of desire to draw.
she's amazing.
She's amazing. She
Makes me
does
wanna
not
quit.
stop. And she just gets better and better. And it's been just an amazing process watching that kind of development. And that's something that, while not guaranteed for everybody, because it all depends on talent, it all depends on a certain degree of talent too. But you can do it. Doesn't. You can do something. You can keep on growing and developing that talent. And again, it's 10,000-hour rule. The more you do it, the more you're intuiting shortcuts that will make your drawing experience feeling less haphazard and on the fly, so that you're less nervous about what you're doing. If you're nervous about anything, you just want to make sure you're going to do good drawings, but you're not like totally overwhelmed by the circumstances. I think that's one of the easiest things to have happen when you're first in a situation, to get overwhelmed. And so one of the reasons I think we do a great, it's a great benefit to us when we do these extended embeds, is that you're guaranteeing the first couple of days is going to be total screw-ups. Just one bad drawing or one failed drawing. Never, I don't call them bad drawing, but one failed drawing after another, one page after another, where something is happening and you're turning it because it's already over, and you're not going to, and you may not be going back to it, especially if it's a more kinetic situation and it's not a training exercise necessarily. But so you have a lot of failed pages in that respect. Nothing bad, that's how it goes. And one of the things you have to develop or discipline yourself to is, if the drawing doesn't work, flip to the next one. Just got it. Let it go. Let it go. It's just a piece of paper. And actually, you can always go back to it long after the fact and look at, and you can see what you were trying to do. You remember the stories. You can see what you're trying to do, and then and you can see in the following pages where it kind of developed, or it just went into something entirely different. But you can follow like a narrative in the course of a sketch book. But those first couple of days are just gonna be ruinous for the most part. It's rare that we come into a situation where we're on the ball right from day one. You're feeling it out. You're getting a sense of where you are, where you should be positioned. You're with Marines or soldiers, and in one sense you're the outsider. I don't wear a uniform. I kind of like wear these. I wear khaki shirts and stuff like that. I got my khaki multi-pocketed fisherman's vest that just bulging with all sorts of pens and pencils and and different smaller pads, so I don't stand out, but I also don't necessarily blend in. So you're the outsider. So you also have to keep in mind that you're going to have to be gotten used to, which takes about a day or two, right, Chris?
Right, yeah.
By the second day, by the end of the second day, you start hearing little whispers going around you that those are the guys. They're drawing us.
He's okay.
You also can't be needy. I mean, in the field, you can't be needy. If they think they have to take care of you or
Oh,
watch
no.
you, or
No.
you'll just be all done. You'll be all done.
You're really you're really messed up if you do prove to be an obstruction or needy. That's a good term. If you really don't know what you're doing, that's not appreciated, because you're a professional artist in that sense. You're a pro, but they're also pros, and they're pros who are doing their job. And the worst thing a pro wants to have happen is to have somebody interrupting their professional activities, especially if it's something that relates to life and death, like being in uniform and training for combat situations where you're trying to stay alive, and as Patton would say, make the other guy die for his country. So, any questions? I'm so open for questions right now.
Your first day on the job, back in your 20s, I guess, what would you tell yourself then,
My
knowing what you know now? What would be the first thing you tell yourself then? As you're sitting there killing yourself over these compositions that were probably pretty darn good, but because I think the artists are very critical of themselves.
we're very critical, but also, I still didn't have a good idea. When I first started out with the Air Force Art Program,
Yeah.
I came loaded for bear.
For
And
bear?
I bought so much material, all right? You don't, and it's ridiculous. You can't go out lugging bags of art supplies, especially in kinetic situations like urban combat. You're not going to set up that way. What's the best thing in the world? Again, I love those vests, those fisherman vests. Just have like 3 or 4 already sharpened boxes or packs of pencils and a small pad and a bigger pad. It took a while to learn that. It took I'm a slow learner, and it took me quite a while to stop lugging 800 pounds of art supplies. It makes no sense. These were done on note paper, and actually, I discovered Prismacolors via Brody because that's what they had in Guadalcanal. They had those wax pencils. You know, they didn't have art supplies, and so he discovered those wax-based pencils, which they used in the offices, in the combat offices. You know, so and that's where he developed. Basically, that's where he really developed his that repertorial finesse for doing this kind of work. You know, what do you need here? You need pencil, and in this situation, it's a black and white pencil. No, it's a black pencil, and you need a pad. That's all. You don't need a camera. But he didn't have a camera. He had a steel trap memory too, which never hurts.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So you're telling me about you're telling about the sketchbook and how if you are done with a drawing and it's not working, you go to the next one. On a percentage, if you were to say of a sketchbook, some that doesn't work, like in sketches that do work, what would you say the percentage would be?
Oh, I've got sketchbooks which almost 80% fail and 20% acceptable. Some are 60-40, but and you know, you buy those moleskin pads and they're not cheap, but at the same time, you got to get over that hump and think, yeah, but it's a book, it's paper. Ultimately, it's paper, and you can't feel precious about the drawing. You can't feel precious about the paper. I got neurotic problems about drawing on really good paper, on expensive watercolor paper.
Yeah.
I fail. I'm a guaranteed fail because I look at this $10, $15, $30 sheet of watercolor paper. I'm going.
That was the toughest lesson in art school.
Nothing is
That-
precious.
that-
Precious.
They were
Yeah,
told
you
that
have to,
nothing
like,
is precious.
Yeah, that's why I'll draw on steno pads because no one gives a crap. You know, it's just
Yeah.
One of the epiphanies for me, as a professional illustrator, not even necessarily doing on-the-spot work, was starting to draw on bond paper. And because you could get nice, 50 sheet pads of bond paper, and if you get a good bond paper, it'll last. It's good quality paper, but it's also semi-transparent. So in my studio work, if it's not working, it's the next one. I'm not attached to it. Each sheet is not $10. Each sheet is not $20. The whole pad is $20 or something. You know. So
The director of Finding Nemo, I heard on there in a radio interview or a television interview. He said he tells his storyboarders when they're doing a movie or they're planning something. He says, "Fail early and fail often. Fail as often as you can, as early as you can." To summarize or to paraphrase it. Because once you get all those failures out of the way, then you can get down to the stuff that's really going to be there. But we're so precious on, oh, I can't fail, I can't fail. You got to just fail, and then you get to the success.
And that's kind of a hard nut to crack, because I think for all of us, because as was mentioned before, we are very critical of what we do, and we can get into a kind of like a batter's slump if we start doing a number of drawings that are just not satisfying. Like, wow, did you ever know how to draw? But, and when you get to that frame of mind, then you might as well write off the day, because then you can't get out of that. Then you're just constantly striking out, you know. And I don't know how one does it, other than I think cheap paper. Although most of it is not cheap, but I see it. It's flexible paper. It's not rigid. It's not one sheet at a time. It's a pad, and then pads like this. You know, these are great. Drawing well doesn't work. Learn the next one.
I do have another question. So you talked about important lines and gestures up front. How is it just with experience you figure out what those important lines are?
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah, that's internal training.
Correct.
That's what you learn. That comes from drawing as well, just from gestural drawing. That's why at the Society of Illustrators, I can't think of any place that doesn't that has drawing sessions that doesn't start off at least with those 1 and 2 minute poses in the beginning. Why? Because if you're going to start off right from the bat, well, goodbye. You know, goodbye. You have to just loosen up to almost a ridiculous point, so that you can pull it back and bring it to that happy medium.
Chris had told me that you had a concept of finding like the repetitive set point and drawing that because they'll return to that point. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I find that really interesting.
Well, yeah, that was again was one of those things that was learned trial and error. Rather than finding yourself chasing after the action all the time, especially in a training exercise, you figure out, you see where the focus points are at these exercises, and then you plant yourself there. If they're going to be repeating it, then you know certain things are going to be happening. Certain people are going to be in similar situations. The body language, you don't reinvent the walk. There's a way you walk, or there's a way you run.
Or firing a howitzer.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You know,
Firing
so-
a helicopter.
So the repetitive action, and if you have that, then you can just keep going back to filling up that drawing that you started before. Also taking pictures. One of the I was doing combat control for the Air Force, and they did a lot of exercises where they were like, dangling off the ropes, going from one end to the old jungle gym type stuff. And they would be like in units of like 24, 25 men. Well, I'm not, and the entire exercise maybe took 8 seconds. I think I counted it off at one point. I said, for him to get from this point to that point took him 8 seconds. So
You're not gonna draw it.
I'm not God. I can't draw it in 8 seconds, okay? I may be fast, I may be good, but I ain't God. So, but there's somebody else following you. And my job is not to draw portraits. That's it. Oh, okay, another thing. Because it's kind of tangential, but it's there. Not drawing portraits. I think one of the worst things we can do as visual journalists is to go right for the portrait. You see that Marine, you see that soldier, and you start with the head. And you're trying to get the head down. And you're trying to get the eyes and
The likeness.
the likeness. And before you know it, that person's gone. What you had to do was get the body down, get that gesture down, even if it's one of these things. Even here, you can, real quickly, where's the weight? Where's the relaxed part? What's the lean, you know? Quickly, note, you know? I'm so freaking guilty of it that I would start with the face. And again, slow learner. It took a while to realize, you gotta.
Well, there also is a great tradition of wonderful combat art portrait sketches out there.
Yeah.
But you have to put yourself in that mode. You have to know that's what I'm doing. I've got the Marine sitting down here. I know his name or her name written down, talking. Then I can draw the portrait. But yeah,
That's your that's your captive audience
Right.
situation. Or if, like outside, we out here we have like the snipers, the models of the snipers. I guess Fallujah. Okay. You got your captive audience. That you can draw. Then you can concentrate, you know, on the likeness, on the character study. Or if a Marine or a soldier is sitting right in front of you, and you're there and you're waiting for the next thing to happen, you start drawing him or her, and you're like, you have all the time in the world now to really get to study the face, to try to get to capture the humanity, you know. And I'm always looking for that that gesture, that gives me some insight, a little look into the person I'm drawing. And it's not a brag. This is just an observation. When I've heard people say, you know, you caught that person, you caught that expression. Well, that's what I'm looking for. And if you're sitting down with somebody long enough, something's going to happen. There's going to be some sort of give away about who they are. I was drawing this warrant officer in Iraq once, and he was just sitting there, and this is when I was not with the Marine Corps, this is when I was Faraday's troops first. And I'm just sitting there, I'm drawing him. It's Thanksgiving week, we're there jumping from base to base. And he was just sitting there, and we just got into a little bit of a conversation. I don't usually talk. I'll ask a question and let somebody else take off. Because I'm concentrating, you know. If I'm not a good conversationalist when I'm drawing, most of the time, unless I've had a few drinks. But
While you're drawing.
while I'm drawing, But as he kind of like talked and he started talking about his family back home, his body started changing. It relaxed, you know, this Marine. And I caught him, you know. I said, okay, that's what I'm looking for. That kind of suddenly this gentleness came into the face, and he was out of Marine character. He was in father character, dad character, you know. And that's what I put down in the drawing. And that's what I found. And, you know, all these drawings got sent back to their families and stuff like that. And the nicest thing was always when I would hear from the mothers or the wives or the kids or something like that that's the way he looks when it's such and such thing. When such and such happens, that's his expression or her expression. So that's good. That's when you know you've done a good portrait. You get that kind of observation that they're connecting with what you caught, you know.
That's why it's hard to do from a photo if you don't know, you've never met the person.
Yes, and
You
photos.
just get a static photo.
And there's also something I look at the drawings I do on the spot without the camera, and then I'll look at drawings I've done on the spot without the camera, but I've also taken a picture, and then I'll go home and I'll rework it, and it's a totally different drawing because when you have this when you have a printed out high resolution image in front of you, you got all these details, and suddenly you're in the weeds again. You know, you're picking out things. Your drawing becomes more studied. Even if you're trying to stay gestural, not going to happen because you're aware of all these details. The camera locks in all the details. Our eyes lock in what's most important for us as artists. We look for what's most important. The camera says everything's important right now. And it's gonna be up to the viewer to pick and choose what is important in that photograph. We're the photo, when we're in a one-to-one situation or in a group situation, and we're trying to draw that, we are the camera. We are our edited camera. We are going for what's most important to our eye, to our storytelling. You know?
You know, they say photographs don't lie. Oh, yes, they do. They flatten out, they mess with color. Now, they can be used positively. You can amp up color. I find that sometimes it's good for detail. I'll take a bunch of shots, not as a photographer, but as a sort of reference searcher. So if there's something in the way of something, I'll take, well, what's the boot look like? Oh, I better make sure I get certain things right. But you're right, you can become a slave of the photograph, and it can actually lie to you, it can distort and do things that you're not going to have trouble with if you're there.
And also you don't catch that personal gesture, like, you know, like if you see formal portraits painted, they probably are photoreal to the picture they took of that person, but if it's not their personality, if it doesn't capture who
Right.
they are, all it is just repeating the photograph.
That's why so many portraits that I look at, like official portraits, they just look so dead. Why? Because they're probably working off of photographic. They went in, they did a session, they shot the person, because it's not John Singer Sargent anymore. Okay, you're not going to have your model sitting for you 6-8 hours a day in the studio, getting a little peeved maybe. And that's another thing. Are we rendering or are we drawing? Are we giving a gesture, or are we trying to get every crease and wrinkle correct? You know? It's your choice. And it can work either way. I'm Willem Dafoe. I'm going for the new agey gesture spirit. You know? Some of our colleagues are very much into the details. They're into the woods right from the start. And the nice thing, again, going back to Elise started because she was working with all of us, you know, she got different perspectives. So I'm trying to corrupt her my way. Richard Johnson's corrupting her in his way. Chris is corrupting her in his way, you know. And
The great thing is she's got such resources that we all do. This is the great part about collaboration and get with these people. And one of the reasons we send people out in groups of at least 2 is because then you can have mentor-mentee, and you can the work ethic, and you can build competition, but it's friendly and it's collegial. Hey, Victor, I got a question for you. You, of course, were mentored by Brody. How would you say his visual and work DNA are in you today?
I'm not Howard Brody.
Right.
I can't draw like you. I can't draw like Todd. We all draw because we're all seeing the world through our particular eyes. We may be impressed by people whose work we really like. I love Singer Sargent, and I think more than anything, when I do my drawings, I'm thinking, especially when I'm doing the portraits, one of the reasons I love those moleskin pads, the texture of the paper is such that, and you can get similar to that with Strathmore 400 Smooth, but as the pencil starts getting away from the point, it becomes flatter, then you start doing the shadows, and it starts feeling very litho-like, you know, like lithography, and you can get those wonderful tone effects. And I just lost it.
Everybody has their own stuff.
Everybody has their own stuff. So I draw that, you know. That's where Singer Sargent comes in for me. And in a sense, if you look at something like that, which is a more finished piece, that, by the way, was sitting behind the front bombardier in a B-17. So this is, you know, you're on a mission, and you could go down with the plane as well. You know, a lot of those great reporters from CBS and NBC and ABC, they flew those planes. Who's the crabby guy on 60 Minutes? Andy Rooney. Andy Rooney was on B-17s or B-24s. They were so shot up, they never really thought that they could get back home.
There's a picture of Kappa, the World War II photographer.
Robert Kappa.
There's a famous picture of Robert Kappa in a like a little plexiglass nosed thing. He's in like a tank attached to the wing, so he's got his camera. And so he's up there and he's taking photographs flying over.
You just have to absolutely admire those kind of guts, and to do it over and over again. But that's that kind of rendering that I'm talking about. That you start getting into, you can start really feeling out the shadows, and then you start getting the form. I love that stuff. I didn't put any of his portraits. I mean, I would pull it up and print it off real fast if you take a break or something. And at some point we got to start drawing, right?
With that said, maybe we can one last question, anyone, and we'll.
Any other questions? Well, let's go back to what we were saying.
All right. Go.
There's also this thing that happens where it's not like the gesture first, where you're doing a drawing and you're caught in the weeds and you're just really caught up in the details of whomever you're drawing, usually in a portrait situation. And then you realize, I got all these interesting details going on, but this is too studied. I always use the term studied. It seems so like school. You know, you're really trying to study what's going on. You're doing the right thing, and guess what? It's just static. But then you get done with that drawing, and then you do it again. And this I find is a truism. A really detailed, a really almost nearly complete piece of a drawing or painting or something that's not working. And if you're honest with yourself and you go, can it? The next one around, you've done all this editing in the back of your head. And you know why it's not working intuitively. So and your all this cell memory is saying this is what you're not going to do on the second round. This is where you're going to go for the truth. You know, this is what you're looking for. You're not looking for this. This is what you're looking for. And the drawings almost invariably come off so much better. They're relaxed. There's energy to the drawing. There's energy to the line. It's not tentative. It's not studied. Does that make sense? All right.
Good deal. We'll take a break.